Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you all to the members of all the participants in the EAPI Summit. I don't know why there seems to be a lack. Anyway, welcome to this panel discussion in which we shall be discussing about the affordable housing and unlocking the 500,000 question. I just would like to welcome my panelists. The first, I will go around according to who I see on the screen. I'll start with Mushai. I'm just I'm trying to sort out just some. Hello, can you hear me well? I seem to be having some challenges. Thank you. Sorry, I was having a bit of challenges with my internet. So we'd like to start to introduce Mr. Mushai Kunyiha, who is the past chairman of the Kenya Property Developers Association. He's still a director at Kenya Properties Developers Association, and also he has recently taken up a new role as the chairman of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. The next person I'd like to introduce is Zoravar Singh, who is a developer and an investor in real estate, and he's also the chairman of the Affordable Housing Task Force at KPDA, and then we've also got Mr. Michael Kanyu, who is a director, who is a member of the Kenya Property Developers Association. He also sits at the Kenya Private Sector Association, representing Kenya Property Developers Association, and he's a developer and has been developing some houses within the range of about 3.6 to up to about 7.2. So I had shared some questions with my panelists, and maybe we could go into talking about affordable housing. Okay. Okay, now I would like to start. I had seen that Mr. Mushai had dropped off, but I think I will start with Zoravar. Zoravar, you've seen that you've been on this affordable housing journey, and one of the challenges that we have met, that we found, is with regard to financing. So could you just take us through that journey, sort of from beginning to end, and see what are the challenges and what maybe could be the solutions that we could have in being able to deliver affordable housing for the private sector, by the private sector?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dujonyo, and great question. Maybe I'll sort of extrapolate on this word journey, because I think it really has been a journey over the last couple of years as we, as a sector, have been trying to, I think, understand affordable housing, the dynamics, the cost structure, the revenue structure, what works in other markets, and what might work in Kenya. And you know, I think we could give government a bit. I know there's a private sector orientation. We could give government some credit in that they put affordable housing as a big four agenda. And from there, we have seen a lot of energy and momentum around affordable housing that may not have been there before. I think maybe before it was considered interesting, but a little bit fringe, and then it became very mainstream coming out of the last set of elections. And when we looked at the financing of affordable housing in general across the sector, there were a number of components that were considered. The feeling that land is a bit expensive, so there was conversation on how do you make land more affordable through JVs and partnerships. There was a concept that maybe that the cost of construction is expensive, and there has been some research on looking at the supply chains of the major inputs and how do you reduce the costs of some of the along the supply chain. And then there was conversations around development finance. How do you make it cheaper for developers to borrow or more accessible for them to borrow and bring down the aggregate cost of development. And then on the offtake side, we've seen a lot of momentum over the last couple of years around the development of the KMRC, which is to help support the development of the mortgage sector. A number of participating banks joining up, and SACCOs joining up the KMRC, and a number of other research and development initiatives ongoing around the unpacking of offtake finance, whether it be TPS funds, whether it be multifamily funds, whether it be crowding into the pensions to be investors in. And so that's sort of a bit of the journey it seems like we've taken, and a lot of it has seemed like it's been in a journey of understanding, trying to understand what exactly is the cost structure, and how do we continue to make the margins in a business where margins are very difficult. There are a couple of strategies that emerged through some of this exploration in the sector over the last couple of years. One of them is developer and landowner JV to bring down the cost of the land. Some of it has been dialogue with government in terms of infrastructure in that land, which is a direct cost. Conversations with the government on speeding up the approval process, which has an implication on cost. There's dialogues with banks, and for example, just like the one we had on a panel that I was moderating 2 panels ago, around the conversation around innovative financing products. So banks thinking about how do they uphold the standard by maintaining things like pre-sale standards for developers, and at the same time, conversations around balancing offtake finance and construction finance. And lastly, it's sort of an institutionalization of our offtake, and with the KMRC coming, which is a structured financial product with a lot of discussion and innovation around pensions investing in the sector and offtake funds, we're starting to see now a lot of momentum in that direction. And I think that to this point, people have started to realize if we can fix offtake, some of the rest of the chain starts to fall in line. So we're starting to see a lot of focus there. So let me stop there. Hopefully I tried to cover a bit of the journey and where we ended up.
Okay, thank you very much, Zorofa. I'll be coming back to you on what are your suggestions on how to deal with offtake. Mushai, you've been in KPDA, you have now transitioned into a new role. You're now in manufacturing. And I want to ask a question really around the manufacturing sector. Do you think the local manufacturing sector is able and ready to cope with the supply chain and logistics for the affordable housing at a cost that will be able to bring down the cost of construction?
Dukhonyo, and pleasure to be here with for this virtual summit. Yeah, I think there is a lot of manufacturing capacity in Kenya, and in fact, most of the capacity is not utilized fully. So you find that there is opportunity to grow, and this would be across the scale whether you take the small scale manufacturers or the larger cement, steel people, there's still a lot of capacity and capability to supply. But what you find is that cost has been the issue, and cost has been the challenge when we think about what are we going to be able to give, and it's affordable housing, so we're trying to minimize the cost of the entire transaction and the inputs. I think the Center for Affordable Housing Finance did some research last year and found that our costs are pretty high. I mean, compared to countries like South Africa, on some items we're 60% plus above what you'd be able to achieve there. And that's largely related to the underlying cost of manufacturing in their market. And perhaps overall, even on the affordable housing scheme, one of the challenges we find is that what is the cost of doing business in Kenya, especially? And I think there is, for that to succeed, there is a need. You can look at sectoral approaches and say, let's get affordable housing, let's build up leather, let's build up steel industries, but look at the overall cost and say, this economy is getting too expensive, and why is it getting so expensive? In one of the big culprits, for instance, in this stage, in this case of the construction, when you take things in steel, is electricity. And the cost of electricity tends to be, I mean, we are way beyond, you know, our comparators, say South Africa again, which was being compared for this purpose. We are way much higher than their, you know, whatever their cost is on power. And that has a huge impact on high energy products like that. So there's, although there's capability, I think, and there's capacity in the industry to supply and to build, we have other environmental, broader environmental factors like power cost, logistics cost, and other operational costs that start driving up the cost of the product and then makes it non-competitive. And therefore you start getting your target of what would be an affordable house becomes difficult to achieve because of the cost. On the other hand, we also have innovation, because that's the other aspect of it, is innovation. And we do have, we've had, you know, all these alternative building technologies coming in, different ideas around what we could do with, you know, EPS, ETC that have been around. So there have been also some input on that side. But again, the cost of the production will become the big issue there. The volume as well was going to be interesting. If we had a lot of volume, we may have reduced the cost, but the underlying cost structure would not have changed. So volume would have helped you a little bit. You could thin the margin like Zorova was on the volume rather, but you can only thin it so far. You have to go back and start saying, okay, why is it so expensive, and try and deal with that. That's all I had.
Thank you very much, Muchai. I'll come back to you about whether you feel that with regard to policies and regulations, whether there's been improvement in that, in trying to deal with the cost of construction. I'll now shift to Michael. You're a developer. You've done about 3 or 4 developments where your target market has been between the 3.5 to about 6-7 million shillings bracket. What is your, in your opinion, the sweet spot for a private sector developer hoping to develop affordable housing? As an individual, as a developer, do you feel you could invest in affordable housing, or what are your hesitations in doing that? Michael? Michael, we can't hear you. Are you okay? I think we've lost Michael. He's frozen. Maybe I'll come back to him later. I'll go back to Zorova again. We've not been able to get Sakina on. In the last 2 years, we've been having, there's been various policy interventions, tax changes to spur development of affordable housing. Have these had an impact on cracking the challenges in finance on the supply and demand side?
That's a good question, Gakonyo. To maybe just to quickly touch on kind of the journey that we've been on with government, engaging with government as a private sector. Early in the work, it seemed like there was some broad-based assumptions made on the potential of the sector, the cost of development, offtake standards, sizes of units, and some of that early work was then ground truthed through sort of a process of engagement, government having engagement processes, private sector doing engagement processes, private sector and government talking to one another. And through that, it appeared a number of issues and let's say bottlenecks had emerged, and the programming really went to start to focus on how do we resolve some of those challenges. Some of them being the cost side, some of them being focused on process improvement. So, for example, the government was looking at things like one-stop shop to help expedite the approvals processes, and where the private sector engaged with government was on the tax incentives and tax relief. And it was through that engagement that and through the government's the ministry's advocacy around the VAT tax incentive. And from our understanding, that was passed, and the point at which it is that implementation now. And so the government is working on how exactly that incentive will be implemented. And the dual benefit is that the implementation is sought to look at how to implement that incentive around VAT tax relief on construction inputs for affordable housing, but also the incentive of reduced corporate taxation from 30% to 15%, because that was passed, but there wasn't a mechanism of implementation. And so we're at the stage of working to create implementation. The government is working on that. And so we've not yet, I think, seen the net effect of what that incentive will do in the sector. But it is projected to have a positive impact as it reduces the cost of VAT. But I think as we're trying to also understand how is it that we don't reduce it for some of the inputs, but then just pass it back down the line to, let's say, the input suppliers and whatnot. So I think some of the implementation is still being thought through, and hopefully once that's done, we'll see a positive net effect. Just one other comment that kind of came up through other conversations as we've been talking about how do we look at affordable housing as a driver coming out of COVID? Could it really help us to pick up economic momentum again? And some of the conversations and dialogues have been around public-private participation and almost like strategy designed together. So if you take, for an example, we've been seeing a project like Railway City picking up a bit of momentum. Now, if we were to look at a project like that and say, okay, well, there's Railway City, there's the neighboring industrial area where Mashai is involved with CAM and whatnot, and then there's neighborhoods like Embakasi. Areas like this, or let's say if we say Eastlands, where the government is also focused, if we took a holistic approach and said over the next 10, 15 years, the program is to work on the redevelopment of these parts of the city. And if there was a strategy that was designed where public and private sector could come together, where public sector unlocked the potential and then private sector crowded in international and local capital, that could help to create a programmatic approach to using housing as a way to recover from COVID. And because the big challenge we have is we don't innately have enough capital within the sector right now. we keep going back to say, okay, government give us incentives, but government also is working on generating their tax revenues. And the only solution really is to crowd in more capital. And the way to crowd in more capital, whether it be local pensions or international investors, is we need to be able to demonstrate that whatever we put down on paper as we project out as economic returns can come to fruition. And that is a combination between public and private sector. Public sector processes and approvals and infrastructure, private sector execution. And so, that if we continue to take that holistic type approach and continue to collaborate, that could help us leverage affordable housing as a mechanism for recovery in the economy.
Well, thank you very much, Zoroa, I'll come back to you on just some other questions later on. I think, yes, we've been involved in a lot of interventions of tax policy interventions, legislation. The challenge in this government is also that after legislation is passed, you have how to implement and how the process to be done. It needs to be put into regulations, and that sometimes takes some time to do. Sakina, thank you very much. Welcome to the event. I think I will now just ask you a few questions. With the developers that you have worked mainly, you've mainly been supplying middle to high-income housing. Do you see your developers having an appetite to enter the affordable housing market? And based on your answer, what is your general observation about that? We're not hearing you, Sakina. Are you unmuted? Hello, can you hear? Your sound is off. Okay, I think we will just, we'll come back to you if you can try and sort out your sound, but maybe we can just now go to Michael Kaniu. I think you are, I hope you can be able to hear us and we'll be able to hear you. Just repeat the question again to you, Michael. I was asking that you've been a developer of at least 3 developments so far. In your opinion, what is the sweet spot for a private sector hoping to develop affordable housing? What price range, maybe what locations? Maybe you could explain to us your journey. Michael?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I think the first thing a developer needs to do is to think of a demand-driven project. And what that means is wherever you're building or trying to conceptualize a project, it needs to be a place where you have a clear exit. So that's the first thing when it comes to affordable housing, because people say people are looking for a cheap house, but if you build your house, for the lack of a better term in Kichogio, who are you building these houses for? So first thing is create a demand-driven project. Then secondly, understand what the market wants. I think if you look in the last 1 year, I think the market is speaking very clearly to us as developers. And how do I say this? If you look at the current projects that we keep seeing on the TV, scandal, they all have something very, very much in common. It's around the 4 million shilling mark, and someone who wants a house that's the size of 120 to 130 square meters. So the market is speaking is they are saying they want a certain price point and a certain size. Some of these may not be practical to execute, because even if you do the mathematics of some of those projects, you can see it's not possible to achieve those numbers. But if you look at what the market is looking at, is starting at that price point. I had a chance to go to to a development around 2 weeks ago. They had a big advert in the paper. They were saying they have a 2-bedroom apartment for 4 million. And it was very interesting,
So
the
this is the
concept
button,
that
right?
they decided to approach as they develop their project. They're looking for a 2-bedroom apartment, 58 square meters, they're only doing 2 floors, and they had built more than 40 apartments in 6 months.
Yeah, but
So as someone looking to do affordable housing, is your project demand driven? Meaning, is the price and the product what the market wants? What's the location? Some of the locations that I've seen that are driving this demand are very interesting locations. Last week I was in Togoto. I was seeing guys doing 3-bedroom bungalows on 1/8, 1/16 of an acre, 3-bedroom, master bedroom and suite for 4 million.
I think Michael has frozen. The challenges of working from home. That's why I had to decide to leave home because my connection was very bad, and now I'm at the offices of Workable.
Hello?
At least, and I get a free cup of coffee. Sakina?
yes, can you hear me?
I think we just moved. Michael, we lost you for a while.
Okay.
Are you back?
So maybe I'll just wrap up. So I think we're having some technical difficulties. I think the price point is important, the location where it's easy for people to commute, access the offices, and the sweet spot of 4 million seems to be a very compelling reason looking at what we're seeing in the market. So as a developer, how smart can you be, create out-of-the-box thinking regarding to your construction, to your size, to your funding, to your location, to your land cost, to be able to attract that buyer? Because we, for example, are working on something similar at 3.7 million range off Naivasha Road, and it can be done. You just have to be a bit more intelligent on how you structure your project to attract that buyer.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I'll come back to you on some other questions just to verify some things. Sakina, they asked a question. I don't know whether you want me to repeat the question or you.
Yeah, no. I remember it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you,
Okay,
Sakina.
perfect. So, what I was saying was initially when the government came up with their big housing strategy, there was a lot of buzz around the affordable housing segment. Now, when we hear figures like, when we hear things like the country needs 200,000 houses, a lot of developers can construe that to mean demand. The thing is, consumer demand really is providing a product at a price at which a buyer is able and willing to buy, and I think that is probably one of the biggest disconnects that we have. At the end of the day, developer participation is going to be run by return and risk. When you look at return in the affordable housing sector, when you look at both of these, it's actually at the moment in with current market forces, it's low return and it's actually high risk. So what that means is, for example, because of the housing to income ratio, I'll explain that if you have an apartment in Kilimani that can be sold at, for example, 16 million, and you can build the same apartment and sell it in Syokimau for 8 million, right? You're assuming that the cost of that product has gone down 50%. But the income level of the person who's buying in Kilimani and buying in Syokimau, the income level of the person in Syokimau is probably about 5 or 10% the one of Kilimani. So the housing needs of the people, as you go lower and lower on the affordability triangle, actually gets more disconnected from their housing needs versus what their income actually is, which is what puts them into this sort of rental model. Now, the more disconnected that is, right, in that if my housing needs are a lot more than what my income actually is, and it gets more and more disconnected the lower I go in the affordability pyramid, then that means that the returns of the developer reduce as you move lower and lower market, right? And that is because we have a huge income inequality, right? So what that means is that because the returns are actually better in the middle and upper markets, in that those folks sort of are on the high end of the income spectrum. For as long as there's activity there, developers are almost always feel a lot more secure there because the returns are better, and to be honest, the risk is lower. So I'll give you an example. During this sort of the last couple of months, with the pandemic that we've been facing, the middle and lower end of the market do not have the cushioning that we do in the Western world, where there's huge government bailouts for the middle market. So they have been the most vulnerable in this time. And what we've seen actually very actively on our books is that all units that are actually sub 10 million have struggled to move in the last 6 months. And so it's a very volatile market, and it's very pegged to what's happening on an economic level, on a macroeconomic level. So when a developer sees that actually the returns are lower in affordable housing, A, B, the risk is higher, it's a more volatile market. And the third thing is that the financing of the entire structure is a bit difficult because you have to go on a mortgage sort of offering, and financing costs in Kenya are quite high at the moment. And especially when the financial exposure can be even higher if having those titles registered so that you get that payout from the bank gives you more exposure to even further financial costs, then the whole thing kind of breaks down. And so many developers, in as much as there's a lot of excitement about the 200,000 unit deficit, are not actually able to make the numbers work for them. So I don't think it's about lack of will, but it's about making it work on paper. And all of it works on what is the level of consumer demand. At the moment, the incomes don't support it. The income levels don't support it. The financial structures don't support it. The lack of infrastructure in areas further along don't support it. So as it is right now in the market that we're in, without any government sort of interventions, without the affordable housing sort of mandate from the government, as it is, it's very difficult for a developer to go there.
Hear you, Gakonyo. I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sakina, and just to improve on our sound, could I ask all the panelists, when you're not speaking, could you just put your mics on mute so that there is no echo and we don't get any interference? It was a bit of a struggle listening to Sakina. So if you're not speaking, just put your mic on mute. Very interesting observations by Sakina, where you indicated that it's believed that this 200,000 deficit means that there is 200,000 demand. I think that's a challenge that we also had a question. I know a former director at KPDA asked that question and said, is there a list of all these people who have demand for this housing so that we can be able to know that these are the people who make up this demand? Because when you say that there is a 500,000 deficit, do you have 500,000 names? I think now I would just be interesting to just find out from you also. I think Mushai, I'll just ask you. In the last 2 years, you've been engaging with government. I think when you were the chair of the KPDA, when we started this journey about affordable housing, which was in the year 2017, December. And there have been various attempts at legislation, policy reforms, enabling legislation to give the local supply chain an advantage vis-a-vis the imported building materials. Now you're sitting at CAM. Do you see as if there's been sufficient policy reforms? We've been in KEPSA together, and we've had that discussion of trying to remove the 1.5% railway development levy, and we've been told that's not going anywhere. We've tried to reduce IDF. There are very many things that we've tried to change. I mean, basically, you're a manufacturer, you are in the manufacturing sector, now you sit at the helm of CAM for the next 2 years. Where do you see local manufacturing needing support to be able to be competitive to imported building materials from China, from Turkey, from Egypt, and all that?
Yeah, that's the suicide pass, Gikonyo?
Yeah.
I think, let's say, I think there's one thing we need to say about the affordable housing thing as well, is that where in Kenya, the structure is also, we have a huge informal market, and we always forget about that. So even if we can say the formal or the organized and state-driven affordable housing project has not really materialized as planned in terms of the number of units that were to be sold, people are still building houses, and there is construction going on. And in fact, from a manufacturing perspective, what I can say is that if we look at the people who sell inputs into construction, although they're not, like I said earlier, they're not at full capacity, they are still producing. We've got new factories, for instance, on roofing. We've got new factories on tiling. We've got new cement factories. So people are building somewhere. And I think one of the challenges was to understand the culture and the psychology around houses. One of the debates I remember we had then with our affordable housing task force is whether people want to buy, a 5th floor apartment in Isili, or they would rather have, a half acre in Isinya. Even though it's very far out of Nairobi, what is the preference there? And if you look at the performance of SACCOs, say, the land buying SACCOs and so on, those are still active and still going on. So people are still buying, and we know the demand is there because there is household formation. We've got a young populations are growing. So every year, the population is moving up and up. And so those people are living somewhere. We don't see them kind of living on the streets as happens in some parts of the world where you actually have people at night just sleeping out on the streets. Most people are housed somewhat, whether it's good housing, appropriate housing, that's another story, but we have been able to build. So in that sense, there is, from a manufacturing perspective, there is still demand and supply for those. On the formal side, it is more difficult. And that's where the challenge is how can we formalize this? And so that we also build units that create a housing stock, which has some kind of value for our economy. So with government, I think it's both. On the tax side, we see it's almost like there's two sides. They can understand the issues of the tax, why we need the tax breaks. And I think we had discussions about the target price, or where we think, I think like Sakina mentioned, what is a mortgage that is affordable for a medium low income person? So that translates into the value of a house you want. So what's the cost of that house that you need to achieve? So that is kind of understood. But now when you go to the other side and say, okay, then therefore let's get out these benefits. Like Zorova said, we got some benefits on taxation, on VAT and so on, but they're yet to be implemented. And in fact, in some cases, we had just recently, like electricity, manufacturers had gotten last year a benefit of a reduction of electricity, a rebate kind of on the taxes, and that has now been removed again. So we are back to full power cost. So I think it's the consistency and the stability of the tax regime that is a problem. one of the things we've actually been calling for is how can we stabilize the tax regime so that we don't have, every year we are having another battle about what's the new tax going to be, or how are we going to reduce this kind of tax things. But again, I say one of the things we need to think about is the overall, say, productivity of the economy. Because when you see, if we have a 62% cost difference between us and South Africa, it is more than just those costs. There is something wrong structurally that we need to look at in our whole economic structure. And that is, like you said, it's about the capital invested, it's about labor productivity, it's about the taxation regimes as well. It's about things like power and so on that need to be addressed. So it is achievable. It cannot be, in any economy, it cannot be a standalone thing that you will do affordable housing. You will have to do the whole economy so that you can then build the affordable housing. And to answer you as well, to get the people who can afford to buy the houses, you have to work on the whole economy, and then that will work together. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mushai, for that update. I know that you're up to the task, even if I give you a suicide pass. So I'd like to move over to Michael. I hope your connections are okay. Michael, you mentioned about that if there was an offtake, maybe as a developer you would seriously consider the delving into the affordable housing. I mean, now affordable housing, we are looking at anything between 3 million and below. If you have got an offtake guarantee from the government for affordable housing, and you've seen recently they've advertised for Railway City that they are able to provide land where a developer can be able to do affordable housing and another housing that's maybe above the 3 million going up to whatever you want. Would you take it? And if yes or no, whichever answer, just give us your reasons. Oh no, he's gone off again. Oh my God.
I'm actually here. I'm just turning my video off just for connection purposes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, as a developer, one thing that I like is having control. I'll just be honest with you. I think the whole aspect of getting to a situation where you're not in control of what you can do, I think limit and allows you to not be as creative as you can in your project. So for me, in regards to guaranteed offtake, I think if I know the KMRC are working on their product, and I mean they have not I haven't heard the formal announcement, but let's take, for example, if they say we are willing to fund up to 4 million and give a 10% mortgage or TPS. I think with that kind of criteria, and then be able to revet developers through something like KPDA, where we can actually build houses knowing that we have a guaranteed offtake. Because I can tell you for free, Mushai, on my projects that are on Naivasha Road, had some 1 bedrooms and I put a price of 3.2 million. I can tell you the number of calls we got just pleading, can you sell us a 2-bedroom at 3.2 million? Were so many, but I just could not be able to do it because of the way I had structured my project. So as a developer, if the KMRC say 4 million and we go through a process where we can actually vet developers who can be in that circle to accept those units, I can tell you developers will come on board. Because if you are assured of guaranteed offtake, and like what we are seeing currently in the market, people using aluminum formwork to build 50, 60, 70 apartments in 6 months, people will come on board because they are sure the exit is guaranteed, and they'll be quick to sell those units. Because like the project that I saw 2 weeks ago, the guy has already sold 50 units already, just from 6 months from when he broke ground. So if that offtake is there, where I don't have to go through the normal hustling as a developer to market and sell and look for buyers, easy play for more developers to come into place. Because Sakina is right, most developers look at the numbers, they're like, you know what, it's not worth my time. But for those who want to be more creative and do something different, I think that's where we need to push to get towards reaching those people at that particular price point that will be given.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know whether it's broken off, Michael.
Still here.
I don't know whether you're still here.
Yeah.
Okay, we broke off a bit. Have you finished what you were saying?
Yes, I've finished. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. I'll just ask a question one final question to you before we try and wrap up. Do you see opportunities for affordable housing out of Nairobi? And if so, in which other counties?
Okay, yes. So the answer is a big yes. I see lots of opportunity in Nairobi. I know there's always a talk, land in Nairobi is very expensive. I can tell you for free, I've done the numbers. I've looked at different ways of constructing. So currently our next project, the price point of the land is $1.5 million an acre. And we are still able to build 500 apartments on 6 acres, selling at a price point of 3.7 million, and be at 5 floors. All this is by being creative in how I fund my projects, how I develop the size of the houses. Houses will be 60 square meters. It can be done, and also look at my margin and ensure that the margin is not crazy, but it's enough, because I think it comes to a point for affordable housing to be something that can really grow. We as developers need to look at, is it only about money? When do I give back as a developer? So those are the kind of conversations we need to have as developers, because we can't continue the gravy train of just making money, but what aspect are we doing as developers to help the people who are less fortunate? It could mean maybe 30% of my project is on a social impact basis. So I say maybe I'll make 10% on these units just to do my part as part of affordable housing, and create that momentum so that more and more people come on board and are able to tackle this issue as many, as opposed to 1 or 2 people who are trying to hustle and get this particular price point in the market. So yes, in Nairobi it's possible with the crazy figures. You just have to be creative in your funding, in your design, in your size, and your location.
Thank you very much, Michael. To all the participants on this, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them on the chat, and I can then be able to ask the participants, the panelists, to give their input. I don't know, I think I'm almost running out of time, but I'll just ask Zorova one more question, and then I'll also ask him to give me a wrap up of what he thinks. Zorova, which international markets could provide good lessons in addressing private sector participation in affordable housing in Kenya? Where do you think we've got lessons, and what are these lessons? And then also at that time, just give us your parting shot about the affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Konyo. I think that what's interesting is that this sector of affordable housing is relatively new, and not to sort of belabor this, a long story, but just to sort of like maybe talk about how that came to be. If you saw a lot of investment by development institutions, let's say, but after 2000, after the MDGs took hold, we found a lot of ODA, overseas development assistance, was being routed to the sectors of health, education, agriculture, predominantly in a rural context. It was only kind of 2010 and beyond that we started to see the rise of cities. And people started talking about urbanization, smarter cities, innovative cities. And so it's actually the space of urban transformation, especially in a developing world context is a fairly new subject. And actually, insofar as subjects go, it's a complex subject because it intertwines infrastructure and housing and land and financial products and government approvals. And so, it's no mystery that it's complicated and it's taking time for the world and various markets to figure out solutions. And as we in Kenya try to find solutions, it's always helpful to look at other case studies in other markets. There's some good case studies out of India that are coming around financial product innovation and digital technologies. So, for example, as we talk about KMRC and mortgages and whatnot, a big challenge that we find in the market is that we have a predominantly informal workforce, and our banks who are still going to manage and maintain the risk of that mortgage, because you see the KMRC is only a refinancing mechanism. The risk still sits with the bank. They traditionally lend to the formal sector. And so if you look at India, what there is there's sort of a whole process around formalizing the process to engage with informal, if you will, sort of understanding what is relative credit scoring for the informal sector, what are relative income levels using proxy balances, M-Pesa balances and credit usage, for example. And so, there are some interesting case studies coming out of there. I think other markets have shown us, whether it's favelas in Rio or informal settlements in Mumbai, how we can look at slum rehabilitation programs. When we think of Nairobi, we say Nairobi maybe has about 5 million people. We often say that about 60% of that live in informal settlements. So that's about 3 million people, right? If you add up Mathare, Kibera, Kawangware, Kangeme, parts of Embakasi, those can surmise to about that 3 million or so people. So we realize that actually there's a lot of work that needs to go into the informal settlements, very specifically. If you're saying, look, where is the greatest human development need where you don't have free-flowing water or you don't have proper sanitation systems or proper electricity systems, you can see the greatest and most dire need is within those informal settlements. And as they call it, slum rehabilitation programs are inherently difficult because you don't have much land, right? Like you kind of always have to displace people and move people around to resolve that issue. But the context of development is possible because you only have a ground coverage ratio of 1, where you can have vertical developments and you can house everyone. And so I think that there are a few good case studies. I think we're also out of Southeast Asia, places like in Indonesia and Thailand, we see tremendously dense cities, Malaysia. And so there are a lot of ways for us to understand that. Now, just kind of in a wrapping up, I kind of wanted to give a bit of a plug, but also kind of pull it all together because I think we're talking about this in a private sector context, right? I think that's like how do we build beyond 500 with a private sector context? Part of what we're doing at the KPDA is working on the development capacity building program, where it's a program where we want to take developers and other industry leaders through a program, a 10-module program on how to put up a design, finance, structure a building, how to do due diligence, how to do investment decision-making processes, governance, and then link those projects with capital. Because we're often hearing that the investors that want to enter the market are not finding bankable projects on the supply side. And so as a developers association, what we're working to do is try to enhance the capacity of the developers and the projects to make them more investment worthy. At the same time, we're trying to work with the banks and the pensions and the big investors to unlock some of the offtake as well. So I think, to try to summarize kind of next steps and where we've all been moving, whether it's government and private sector, a lot of it is a lot of the solution unlocking is collaboration. It is continuing to work on the product innovation. It's continuing to streamline processes and supply chains, and it's continuing to design for the customer who really needs it.
Okay, Zorba, thank you very much. I will just ask Mushai one question. Somebody has posted a question here saying, assuming that the government incentives are not approved in the next 10 years, does that mean that no developer will build affordable housing? Can KPDA work on piloting a project that is not dependent on government incentives?
Yeah, that's a good
I know that's another.
I think as we wrap up, we can just say, look, people are building houses. People are building affordable houses. So it is, to say that there are none being built is not true. Like I think Michael mentioned, if you go upsides of Sogoto, the outskirts of Nairobi, Moshadha, and so on, there are houses that are being built. And they are affordable. I think we need to think affordable in two senses. There's affordable in terms of it is decent housing that people can live in and pay the rent, because that's the first step of affordable housing. Is like Zoraba mentioned, it's about slum upgrading. It's people living in decent housing, and that can be done on a rental model. But there's the other objective sometimes of affordable housing is you're trying to create wealth, get people to invest and save. And that can be done. But I think in our market, because of the challenges of the informality, the challenges of capital, like that was mentioned earlier, it is a bit more difficult for us to go there quickly unless government can subsidize. You talked about global examples. I visited Turkey, I think 2 years ago, and saw the affordable housing project. And really, it's the government putting money into it. So without the ability of the government to actually put cash into it, it becomes very difficult for it to happen. So I think we can still build affordable housing. And I think even to Michael's point earlier, he mentioned about people who are buying, even those houses that are being bought, those units that are being bought in those areas, they tend to be bought by investors. It's actually an investor who's going to rent the house rather than an owner who is, at least a large proportion of them, not all of them, definitely, but a large proportion of them. So there is that space if we can create an investment model where people can get rental off of them. And there will be housing because, like we said, people are there, people are going to live somewhere, housing is going to be built. Whether it will be for sale, whether it will be as profitable or as structured as we'd like is what the issue will be in the next 10 years. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mushai, for that wrap up. And I will just give Sakina just 1 minute and Michael 1 minute, and we can wrap up beyond our time. Sakina, how would you wrap up? Sorry about your connection.
Yeah, sorry about that. I would have to agree with Mushai in that there's always going to be housing, but whether the person buying it is the one who's going to be living in it is the ultimate end goal. At the moment, people are buying housing and then because they can't buy the housing that they can't afford the house that they want to live in, they'll become landlords before they'll become homeowners. So if I need to live in a house that's 16 million shillings, for example, I'll rent that out. But what I can afford to buy is an 8 million shilling house, which I'll then rent out to somebody else. So we've got a large class of landlords, but not homeowners. And that's going to continue happening. So I don't think we need to panic about the stock. That will continue to happen. But I think the idea is, how do we get this connect where somebody's income or financing is equal to the rent that they would pay on a normal basis. And once you get that connect, then you'll be able to get a lot more home ownership.
Thank you very much, Sakina. Unfortunately, I've been asked to mute and move on. Michael, I can't see you, but I think unfortunately I can't allow you to give another feedback. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank very much my panelists for this very engaging conversation. It has taken us 1 hour. We got very few questions, but I hope that you've all enjoyed listening to all these experts who have been drawn from various experiences, manufacturing, finance, middle and high income, and actually a developer, Michael Kani, who is almost cracked it, and he'll crack the affordable housing. So we hope by next year he'll be able to come and share with us the journey that he has gone through. Thank you very much, and thank you all for participating on this panel. Thank you. Over back to the organizers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.